I'm Ingrid Arboin, and I'm going to be taking you on a journey to dive into binary star astrology. You have heard that we are all stardust. In this video, I'm going to share with you that we have a binary star system and the sun does have a partner. Later in this video, I'm going to show you who that partner is, so stick around. I'm going to show you a whole system of astrology that is quite different from what we have known. So if we are a binary star system, how does it work? Fair warning, I'm going to go into some topics that include theorists such as Copernicus and Kepler and Isaac Newton. But it's going to be worth it because I'm going to dive in and really show you how we actually have a totally different system than we thought. Don't worry, it doesn't involve that our Earth is flat. We're not on a flat Earth at all. It's really exciting because once we dive into it, you're going to really see how powerful this information is for your own growth and development. So a terma is a Buddhist term for something that is hidden from view, that comes into our view at the right time. So in astrology, an example of this might be something like Pluto and Uranus. When they came into our consciousness, they really changed our understanding of our world. For instance, when Pluto was discovered, the nuclear bomb was also discovered at the same time, and Pluto is around deep power structures and transformation and explosive kinds of things like the atom bomb. So when something comes into our awareness, it shifts our understanding of things. It allows us to develop deeper awareness, both personally and as a society. And so that is what binary star astrology is. It's like a terma that is coming into our awareness right now. So in researching relationship cycles for the book that I'm writing, so I will give you a link to the website where you can subscribe to get notified when the book is available. But it's about relationships, and I looked at Venus and Mars, and this seemed like the perfect place to start because Mars is the masculine energy and Venus is the feminine energy. And together they talk about relationships. And so I was looking for patterns and cycles with the relationship cycle of Venus and Mars. And what I discovered was quite interesting because Mars, I discovered, is a planet that has riddled us for many, many thousands of years. In looking at the cycles, I stumbled on something quite unexpected, seemed to have no rhyme or reason. A regular cycle with Mars and Venus didn't seem to emerge until I added the sun. So my big question was, why is this happening? My inquiry led me to discover that Mars has a cycle that has confounded astronomers and astrologers since the days of Mesopotamia. Mars' cycle was so confounding that Kepler said that if one discovered the mysteries of Mars, they would uncover the secrets to the universe. Now, both the Mayans in the Dresden Codex and the Sumerians captured data about Mars. Both noted that Mars had a 79-year cycle. That is a sidereal cycle, a cycle that is measured against the backdrop of the stars. So they would pick a star and look at Mars at that star, and then they would calculate how many days it took. And so they both came up with similar information about Mars, and it helped them to predict Mars's cycle. Okay, so in Mesopotamian times, Mars was called Samnuna, or different, or Sara, liar, or Aha, strange. It was also called the false planet. These names were not always explained, but Mars's aberration was known to the Mesopotamians and the Babylonians, and so those names do make sense when you look at how Mars behaves. They knew that it would take 79 years for it to get back to the same place, and so they used a couple of different ways to be able to measure that, and it involved a very complex system that also the Mayans used. The Mayans outlined this in the Dresden Codex, and they mapped out how many days Mars took to come back to the same star as well. And they noted that Mars had a very strange pattern, and I will get into that pattern a little bit later in this episode. So it's amazing that any pattern would emerge with Mars, but in fact it does when you add Venus and the Sun. In fact, they have a predictable synodic cycle with the Sun that, from our perspective here on Earth, traces a rose or a pentagram. And so Venus traces that rose pentagram shape over the period of 8 years. And Mars traces that same pentagram with Venus and the Sun over a period of 32 years. And so they join in that pattern for a number of years, and then something happens. And it switches up and it changes, and then they come back to that pattern. So very strange and very unpredictable. Long story short, the cycle of Mars and Venus is very strange, but there's no pattern that can happen between Mars and Venus without the Sun. It should be noted for those astrologers watching this that these conjunctions never perfect entirely, meaning they don't come to the exact degree, but they happen when both Mars and Venus are behind the Sun, and so we cannot see them from our perspective, and they're within a couple of degrees of each other, so we call them conjunction, but they're not a perfected conjunction. It's still very important, particularly for the Mayans and the Sumerians, who didn't have an astrology program to pinpoint exactly when that time was happening. And so we still count it as very, very important, a very, very important cycle. Now, they weren't as concerned as we are today with how things work. They only observed what happened and what did it mean. And so now when we get to people like Kepler and Copernicus, they want to know how it's working. How does it work? So Copernicus had proposed the idea of a heliocentric universe, and it didn't catch on initially. In fact, it was heresy. But Kepler liked the model, and so building on Copernicus's idea that the Earth revolved around the Sun, he set about to find the secrets of the universe and focused on Mars. He proposed that not only did the Earth revolve around the Sun, but there were 3 laws that govern that movement, and they are what Kepler called the laws of planetary motion. The first was that some planets had an elliptical path around the Sun, meaning they weren't perfectly circular, they made a kind of a rounded, oval kind of shape around the Sun. The second was that an imaginary line could be drawn from the center of the Sun to the planet that would sweep across in equal areas of intervals of time. And so from our perspective, that would mean that even though they're equal, it seemed like they spent longer periods of time in a particular sign as the planet moved around. And then the third was the ratio of squares over a period of 2 planets is equal to the ratio of cubes of their average distance from the Sun. Who knows what that means? It didn't quite work out, and so it took until the idea of gravity came into effect, and that gravity helped to explain it even further. So that was Isaac Newton. But planets needed to basically speed up and slow down in order to make distance, and this is where gravity came in and made it make sense to some extent. But when you really look into what Mars actually does, and you look at the data from both the Mayans and the Sumerians, you know that this does not explain how Mars actually works, because Mars has a 707-day cycle for 7 cycles, and then a short cycle for 546 days. And then it does the same thing for 8 cycles, and then has a 546-day cycle, each of them adding up to 32 years. But within the 15 and 17-year cycle, Mars has always one short cycle. So that would mean that Mars would have to speed up in one random year and do double time to make the theory work. And so it doesn't work. It never did work. There was another astronomer who, like many of them during his time, was obsessed also with Mars. He was an astronomer who was known for his precise catalog of planetary movement, and his name was Tycho Brahe. In fact, Tycho Brahe was Kepler's boss. Tycho Brahe proposed the theory that Mars and the Sun had overlapping orbits. Unfortunately, Tycho died only a year after Kepler went to work for him, and this resulted in Kepler inheriting all of Tycho's data. Though Tycho's had accumulated data that supported his model, Kepler took that information and he used it to come up with his 3 laws that explained the heliocentric model that we now subscribe to. In fact, we do know that Kepler fudged his data. This is summarized in these 2 articles, Kepler's Fabricated Figures Covering Up the Mess of the New Astronomy. This is by W.H. Donahue, and it was published in the Journal for Histories of Astronomy, which is found on NASA's site. The New York Times summarized this article as well. They also explain the same thing. This was in the 80s, but even though they reported on this, none of us seemed to care or mind or take any note of it. And so it's like NASA went, nobody noticed, let's keep going. We don't need to correct this mistake at all. Because in fact, it's a massive change in our understanding of our world. So let's bring it to today. Simon Schack, in his book, The Tychos, the Geoaxial Binary System, has gone back to the Tychos model and modernized it. In his updated model, Simon takes into consideration a number of things that were unknown during Tycho Brahe's lifetime. The first is the binary star system. As in Tycho's original model, Mars and the Sun still have overlapping cycles. But with the updated knowledge of binary stars, Simon explains that Mars and the Sun are in overlapping cycles like Sirius A and Sirius B. Simon's updated model also gives the Sun a 365-day orbit. So Earth is no longer circling the Sun is circling Earth, and the Earth does have an orbit, which he says, I believe, is 24 hours. So it goes in its own tiny little orbit. So to test this model, Simon Schack teamed up with an IT developer to create a planetarium. This planetarium is free for anyone and everyone to explore, and I put a link to this and his book in the description below. But what is really convincing for me was what happened with Mars and its aberration. They finally make sense. Here's a little snippet of Simon explaining the orbit of Mars.
So as you the lengthier one of about 707 days, the long ESI, and an odd shorter one of about 546 days. So that is undisputed. So what does it mean? It means that if you were to look at Mars, you're a very patient man, and you look at Mars, you decide one Sunday to look at Mars, and you say, oh, Mars is just in front of star X, okay, a given star. So you will have to wait 707 days to see Mars reappearing in front of that star. And then you would have to look again 707 so for 7 times, you will have to wait 707 days to see Mars reconjuncting with star X. But the 8th time around, it will only take 546 days. Wow, how could that possibly be? Well, this is explained totally geometrically by the typos. This is the sequence, right? This one. 7 times 707, and then 546. Okay?
Yeah.
So here we are looking at a Copernican simulator, okay? This is 2 screenshots from the scope simulator. It's a classic Copernican simulator. What does it show? This is one of these famous short ESIs. 546 days separate these 2 screenshots. So on 5th of November 2018, to the left, the Earth and Mars were aligned in this way. You see the star X here? For my example, I chose Deneb-Algedi, which is a well-known star.
Yeah, yeah.
And on that day, 5th of November 2018, we were aligned with that star. I mean, Mars was aligned with that star. 546 days later, David, we are again aligned with the same star, although we are both, Earth and Mars, have traveled sideways by 300 million kilometers. And we are supposed to believe that we can still be aligned with that same star. How did they explain it, you say? Oh, they say, well, this star is so far away that it doesn't make a noticeable effect. 300 million kilometers is nothing. It's just a small little beep of a displacement. So, you know, it's a very, very small angle. Probably they're not quite parallel, these lines. Well, they are parallel. If you look, I've been taking great care to see if on their simulators they are parallel. And the first thing we learn in art school is that 2 parallel lines never, or in physics, is that 2 parallel lines never meet, right? So if this were to be true, as Patrick rightly says, Deneb-Algedi or any star will have to be as large, at least as large as 300 million kilometers in diameter, able to see it on both dates, you know. Well, it's not. No star we know of is 300 million kilometers wide. I mean, we're talking about perspective here, basic perspective here. Mars will come back every 707 days on this dotted line. It will come back 7 times on this line. And on the 8th time, it will come back on this line again. Because it's like the loop is closing before, you know, getting to the retrograde loop. Just once every 8 times. Every 1 times out of 8, it will come back on this dotted line. Can you imagine? This was my theory before I met Patrick. I had, you know, on my, you know, on the paper, pen and paper, or you know, with my computer program, I was trying to make it work, but I was so nervous that it wouldn't work once the simulator came out. Can you imagine the day when Patrick gave me the first version of the simulator and this actually happened?
If Mars is a binary star of the Sun, then Mars is the Sun's partner. And as we move into our new world, it only stands to reason that in better understanding our universe, we will better understand ourselves. Everything feels broken, split, and unbalanced. But understanding our binary star astrology helps us to move away from battles and splits and empowers us to make the necessary changes to the imbalances within and without. It also leads us into a place of spiritual growth. Mars is the planet of action, protection, will, energy, desire, force, courage, sex, and power. Like the sun, Mars has a very elemental basic quality. It is neither good or bad, but it can be good when healthy energy is flowing through it, or bad when it is suppressed. It is the planet of war after all. If Mars's energy is suppressed, it still expresses itself, but it expresses itself in anger, in passive aggressiveness, in avoidance, in unhealthy conflict, competition, and war. And so seems to me that understanding Mars and mastering Mars is a very important thing for us. So as of yet, we have not mastered a healthy approach to masculinity, likely because we've never fully understood it. Properly flowing Mars is healthy conflict, healthy competition, healthy sex, and achievement. It's healthy boundaries, and therefore protection of ourselves and others. So this is where astrology brings together personal, relationship, societal, and spiritual growth. This is fifth dimensional astrology. But what gets us to a healthy Mars? First, I need to explain a little bit more about Simon Schacht's model. Simon points out that the definition of a moon is something that only shows one side of its face to the planet it orbits. He then points out that most planets have moons. There are only 2 planets in our solar system that do not have moons, and they are the moon, which is our moon, so 3 actually, but also Venus and Mercury. He therefore proposes that Venus and Mercury are moons of the sun, because they show only one face to the sun, and they don't have any moons of their own. He also points out that Mars has 2 moons, and so Mars is a planet for sure, or a star. They are Phobos and Demios. This is important as it will form the framework for binary star astrology. In binary star, or twin flame astrology, as we may call it at some point, the Sun and Mars are partners, and they are the star that split and created the dust that is the stardust of our souls. And so if you feel like you have a soulmate out there and that you came from the same place, that your soul split, and there is a partner out there for you somewhere, this is likely true. This is how our stars operate, including ours. And this is how we operate because we are stardust. I don't change the meaning of any of the planets, but rather I change what their function and their importance is. With the Sun and Mars, rather than thinking about them in terms of masculine and feminine at this point, I think we can think of them as our ego and our id, like Freud did. Mars is like the id in that it's instinctive. It's our instinctive drive without necessarily having any values attached to it or feelings attached to it. The Sun has already been linked to the ego, in that the Sun is how we express ourselves and our creativity and who we are. So the vehicle for both our Mars and our Sun are the moons. We are the Earth star, and we are experiencing our universe through our moon, which is our intuition, instinct, or third eye. Through the moons of the Sun, which are Mercury, which is communication, and Venus, which is love and values. Mars also has 2 moons, Demios and Phobos, and Phobos is panic, flight, or confusion, and Demios is fear, dread, and terror. These are valuable pieces of information that we gather from those moons to help us understand our drive, our ego, and ourselves. And ourselves are Earth Star. When we integrate the Sun and Mars and understand that that integration happens through the vehicles of their moons and our moon, we become integrated. And so this is what binary star astrology is all about. So I am writing a book about binary star astrology, and it is a deep dive into not just the planets, but the myths around them, and leading from all the way back from Sumerian and Babylonian times to our time, and how those myths can help us to integrate through our moons this information and create wholeness and unity within ourselves and within our partnerships. It also includes the moons of Mars, which we know very little about, so I'm going to go deeper into that. Likely there'll be some more video on that, and it will also be in the book. So this is just our overview of binary star astrology. Thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you again next time.